guys, thanks for joining in to the live stream KFit webinar of some strength and conditioning foundational exercises. We're going to go over some technique, we're going to go over some cues you can use, and we're going to go over some progressions. So I want to give you guys some stuff today to think about, because right now, since we can't be in the gym, since we can't really go really intense on our training, the number one thing that I think we should be focusing on is technique. Now is the time to be refining your technique. So what we're going to look at today is the foundational strength and conditioning movements. So we're talking about the hip hinge, which is really the fundamental movement that kind of covers everything. We're going to go over the hip hinge, how we can measure it, how we can practice it. We're also going to look at how that turns into kind of the deadlift. The deadlift is kind of like the strength and conditioning movement that everybody likes to do. So we're going to look at the deadlift. We're also going to look at the squat. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about lunging and how we can use unilateral exercises to look at some imbalances, some muscular imbalances, and how we can work on those using unilateral exercises. So those are the 4 exercises we're going to go over: the hip hinge, the deadlift, the squat, and the lunge. What I want you guys to do right now, before we get started, is I want you to think about back in the time when you could go to the gym. Maybe you saw somebody in there, or maybe you were working out yourself doing some of these exercises like a squat or a deadlift. Everybody loves doing them. Maybe you were thinking about them and you didn't really quite know how to do something correctly, or you didn't really understand the cues. So when I say cues, that means things that you can tell yourself or that your coach can tell you to help remind you to, for example, keep your core braced, or keep your spine neutral, or to keep the posterior pelvic tilt. Whatever it is, just cues that can help you maintain proper exercise technique. So think about that. Think about what your cues are for the squat, for the deadlift, for the lunge. Maybe you don't have any, maybe you don't know, and that's totally fine. So that's what I'm here for today, is to try and help you guide through some of those things that you can think about so that you can really refine your technique. Because again, now is the time that we should be looking at exercise technique. Okay? So the very first thing that I want to go over, again, this is the fundamental, foundational stuff to any strength and conditioning exercise, is the hip hinge. The hip hinge is a super important fundamental movement to know. You use it every single day, or at least you should be using it every single day when you pick something up off the floor. Whether it's weights, whether it's a dog, whether it's a box, whatever, you should be using a hip hinge to get into that position. I'm going to show you what the hip hinge looks like, and then we're going to talk a little bit about it. I'm going to go from this angle here. So a hip hinge is just hinging from the hips. If this is our lever, we want to be able to hinge from the hips while maintaining a neutral spine. So you can see here, everybody has a natural lumbar curve to their spine. Everybody's going to be different. Somebody's might be a little bit more prominent, somebody might have a little bit more of that posterior pelvic tilt, and they won't have as much of a lumbar spine or a curve in their lumbar spine, but everybody's going to have a natural lumbar spine. I want you to recognize that right now. If you're practicing along at home, great, stand up, find your kind of natural sitting lumbar spine. What is that lumbar curve in your spine? I want you to be able to keep that when we do our hip hinge. So again, when we do the hip hinge, we're thinking hips go back. That's the first cue that you're going to use for the hip hinge, is the hips lead the motion, the hips go back. Hips go back. So it's like you have, from your back, from your tailbone, a rope, somebody's pulling your hips back. So when we pick something up, we shouldn't just go down with it. We should hip hinge back. It's really all in the hip hinge. And you can already start to see how this is going to start looking like a deadlift, or how this can start looking like a squat or whatever. But unless we have the hip hinge, we're not going to be able to do these other exercises. So this isn't quite long enough, but if we have a longer stick, what you can actually do is you can put this on your back, and you should have 3 points of contact. In fact, we'll look at this in a sec. 3 points of contact. You should have the back of your head, your shoulders, and your lower back. So you can see here, if I just hold this here, I have a natural curve in my spine. There's space in between this stick here. When we do our hip hinge, we should be able to maintain the curve in our lower spine. Maybe if I turn this way, maybe we'll go this way, curve in the lower spine. See how there's a little bit of space between there? That should stay there when you do your hip hinge. Very commonly, when people do their hip hinge, they round their lower back, and now they've lost their 3 points of contact. So again, 3 points of contact, the back of the head, the shoulders, and the lower back. When you do your hip hinge, all 3 of those motions, all 3 of those points of contact should stay there as you're doing your hip hinge. So this is fundamental stuff. This is kind of level 1 hip hinge. Put a broomstick, put something behind, all the way down your spine. Maintain those 3 points of contact, and then start just practicing your hip hinge with the hips going back and the hips coming forward. Hip hinge. A couple other cues that I want you to think about. So right now, we have hips go back, perfect, hips lead the motion. We should be able to feel a stretch in the hamstrings, in the back of the legs. There should be a little stretch here. We want to have what we call soft knees. We don't want to lock our legs straight. We want to have soft knees, and then we want the hips to lead. Feel the stretch in the hamstring, maintain that neutral spine, use your hamstring and your glutes and your lower back, collectively termed the posterior chain. Use that to pull the hips forward and squeeze the glutes at the top. So hips go back, feel the hamstrings, feel the glutes, pull the hips forward, squeeze the glutes at the top. We also want to make sure when we do pull the hips forward that we get a little bit of a posterior pelvic tilt at the top. Now the posterior pelvic tilt is a whole other foundational exercise that we will talk about maybe in another day in another video, but for now, just think about the posterior pelvic tilt of bringing your belt buckle to your belly button, okay? So again, hip hinge, hips go back, soft knees, feel the stretch in the hamstrings, use your posterior chain, pull the hips forward, squeeze the glutes, and you can repeat that over and over again. But again, maintaining that nice neutral spine is the most important thing that you can do on this one. For progressions, what we can do to make this harder. So step 1, just use the stick to get that hip hinge working with a neutral spine. Then we can start adding weight to it. I'm just going to grab something here. This is obviously not a weight, but you could use a kettlebell in this situation. The next progression is holding a weight behind your back. So a kettlebell works great here because you can just grab onto the kettlebell. And then when you do your hip hinge, you're still maintaining that neutral spine. So you hold on to the weight in the back here first, because that's going to help keep a neutral spine and keep your chest high. So the next level here, holding the kettlebell here, hips go back, same thing, using those cues, pull the hips forward, squeeze the glutes. Hips go back, feel the hamstrings, pull the hips forward, squeeze the glutes. So level 2, weight behind. Level 3 is the weight in front. Now we're going to make things a little bit more difficult because your weight is going to pull you forward. It's a lot harder to maintain that neutral spine with the weight in front. So with the weight in front, leading with the hips, you're going to let those hips lead, maintain that neutral spine until you feel the stretch in the hamstrings. We don't want to lose the neutral spine. As soon as you feel that lose, you reset, and we're going to go back, and we're just going to go to the point where you can maintain that neutral spine. Once you get there again, pull the hips forward, squeeze the glutes. So again, level 1 with the stick, making sure you have those 3 points of contact. Level 2, the weight behind you, hips go back, squeeze the glutes. Level 3 would be weight in front, hips go back, hips go forward, squeeze the glutes. From there, then you can really start adding some more strength and conditioning based exercises like the kettlebell swing, which is really a hip hinge, posterior chain, kinetic chain movement, where now we're getting the hip hinge, but now we're also using the muscles more in a power way, more explosively, to bring the hips forward, and then we can start adding a little bit of a swing with the arms to make it more of an explosive movement using the kinetic chain. That's the hip hinge. So all those little cues that I want you to remember: soft knees, hips go back, pull the hips forward, squeeze the glutes. Those are all things that are going to be important for the hip hinge. And the hip hinge, like I said, is really the foundation of all the other movements like the deadlift, which is what we're going to look at next. The deadlift is a hip hinge movement. It is a hip hinge movement with weight in front. So there's a bunch of different deadlift variations. I'm just going to go over the standard deadlift technique on this one here today. Obviously there's sumo deadlifts and there's RDLs or Romanian deadlifts, stiff leg deadlifts. We're not going to get into those too much. I just want to talk mostly about the standard deadlift on this one. So to properly do a deadlift, hips go back into our hip hinge. From there, we want to have nice and long arms. One of the big keys to a deadlift is having long arms. If you don't have long arms, you just want to make them as long as you can. Reach as far as you can as you get your hip hinge working. Hips go back, long arms. Once you can kind of get that hip hinge back to the farthest motion back, then we start bending our knees until we can grab onto the bar, again with long arms. So my arms are nice and long as I can make them, till I can grab the bar. Then I get a nice little grip on the bar here, and I'm in this starting deadlift position. A couple things that I want to note on this. There's different stances for the deadlift. We want to be careful, you've probably heard this before, don't squat the deadlift. What that means is I don't want you, when you do your hip hinge and when you go down, I don't want you to go all the way down on it. This is like a squat position where I'm way down here with my legs bent. Notice how my arms are kind of slack. It's kind of hard for you guys to see, but my arms are kind of slack right now. If I just grab onto the bar, lift my hips a little bit, that's going to straighten out my arms. Now I'm in a deadlift position. Deadlift, squat. We don't want to squat the deadlift. Hips are high, spine is neutral, arms are long. A couple other things to note here. My hands and the bar are directly in line with my scapulas, my shoulder blades back here. Arms are nice and long, in line with my scapulas. So I don't want to have my body way back here where now the bar is in line with my head. I don't want to be way over top of it where now the bar is in line with my lower back. That's how we get lower back pain. I want to make sure the bar is right over my shoulders, shoulder blades coming nice and long here. So before we pick up the weight, we want to create what's called pre-tension or pre-activation. What that means is I just don't want you to be lazy from here and lift up the bar nice and fast and hard. What I want you to do to create pre-tension is drive your legs into the floor and pull your shoulders into position. See that? Here I'm lazy, I'm set, now I got pre-tension. Lazy, set, now I got pre-tension. I don't know if you can hear that click of the bar, but that's what we're kind of looking for on here. If you hear that click, you know you've kind of got the pre-tension correct. So, hips go back, long arms, bend the legs, get that pre-tension on the bar. Pre-tension on the bar. Legs should be engaged. Hamstrings, quads, glutes, lower spinal erectors, all should be engaged right now, as should the scapulas, pulling the shoulders down into position. From here, all we're going to do, I won't do it with the weight just yet, I'm going to drive through my heels, pull my hips forward, just like I did with the hip hinge. So again, here's the hip hinge. This is the top of the deadlift. Hips go back, I go down, long, create my pre-tension, drive through the heels, and then as soon as I can, pull the hips forward, squeeze the glutes. Arms should stay nice and engaged. To bring it down, hips go back, hip hinge, trace the bar down your legs, let it back onto the floor. Okay? Create the pre-tension, drive through the heels, pull the hips, squeeze the glutes, hips go back, and down. So really, you can see how the deadlift is a hip hinge exercise. So those are some cues that I want you to think about. Hip hinge back, long arms, feel the pre-tension, drive through the heels, pull the hips forward, squeeze the glutes, squeeze the core. Okay, just to review for those of you guys that just jumped in. We've done the hip hinge, we've turned that into a deadlift. So we've got the hip hinge, we've got the deadlift, which is a hip hinge just with a little bit more, a little bit extra. Now we're going to talk about the squat. Squat is everybody's favorite, or maybe not, exercise to do, but it is a really good lower body strength exercise. And probably the number one mistake that I see people doing when they do the squat is that they don't do a hip hinge. The squat is still a hip hinge at the beginning. So this is what I see incorrectly done. This is usually incorrect, is when I see people just go straight down, straight down. The squat is not just a straight down motion. The squat should be done with a hip hinge. Hip hinge. It's not quite as prominent as you would do if you're, say, doing a kettlebell swing or Romanian deadlift, but when you do your squat, the hips still have to go back. Stick your butt out. We still have that hip hinge. Once we do the hip hinge, we then just drop and sit down into that motion, again, maintaining the neutral spine. We want to go at least parallel to the floor with our legs, then we just drive forward. Oh, now we have a hip hinge again, where we pull our hips forward and we squeeze the glutes. So you can see the hip hinge is really what everything is focused on in a lot of strength and conditioning movements. A couple things that I want to talk about, more specific details for the squat, is your feet. So a lot of people will tell you to push through your heels. And that's correct. You should push through your heels for the most part if you want to activate your hamstrings and your glutes. But we don't want to have all our weight on our heels so that our toes are coming off. We want to have 3 points of contact with our feet. We want to have, can you just point down to my feet for a sec? We want to have 3 points of contact when we do our squats. We want to have the front of our feet, so underneath, the front. Then we want to have the outsides of our feet as well. So the outside and the inside and the front. So like a tripod here should all be in contact. So the toes should always stay in contact. The heel should stay in contact. We should feel nice and stable on our feet. One cue that I really like to give people for the squat, which helps activate the glutes and make sure we don't get that knee valgus, which is where the knees come in. We don't want that. We want to keep our knees out. So to do that, I like to use a cue called corkscrew the ground. A lot of my clients listening right now are like, oh yeah, I've heard this, we've done this a million times. Corkscrew the ground is a way where we can activate our glutes, get a little bit of external rotation in the hips, which is going to allow the muscles to be engaged. To do that, you get your 3 points of contact with your feet. I want you to dig your feet into the floor. Grip the floor with your toes. From there, you're going to corkscrew the ground with your feet. So your heels come in. They don't actually come in, but you feel them pushing in as the toes push out. That's going to externally rotate your hips. You're going to automatically feel your glutes activate. So again, I'm gripping the floor. I'm corkscrewing the ground. That's going to activate my glutes. The hard part is to keep this as you do your squat. So when you have your corkscrew the ground, you have your glutes activated, your hips go back, try and maintain that corkscrew of the ground. Hips go back, go nice and low into your squat, keep that corkscrew in the ground, push up, pull the hips forward, squeeze the glutes. Okay? So a few cues for you guys to think about. Corkscrew the ground, okay? Hip hinge back, hips go back, corkscrew the ground, push up through the heels, maintaining that tripod, that 3 points of contact on your feet, pull the hips forward. You can squeeze the glutes at the same time, getting that posterior pelvic tilt at the top. Okay, great. So again, to review, we have the hip hinge, we've talked a lot about it. We have the deadlift, we have the squat. Those 3 exercises, for the most part, they can be changed, but for the most part are what we call bilateral exercises, where we're doing them on both legs. Both legs are working, the whole body's kind of working, but both legs are stable, stationary to the floor. One other exercise I want to show you guys, which again is a foundational strength and conditioning movement, but it's what we call a unilateral exercise, where just one side of the body, or just one leg is working opposed to the other, or at least mostly working, and that's the lunge. So again, a lunge, you guys know what it is. We can lunge forward, there's different variations. We can lunge back, like a step back lunge, or we can do walking lunges, whatever. But when we do the lunge, what makes it so good is that it's more of a unilateral exercise. It's more of a one-sided, one-leg exercises, meaning that the leg that's in front is doing most of the work. So I want to talk about a couple things that I see people do wrong with the lunges, how you can correct them, and then maybe what lunges you should or shouldn't be doing, or maybe trying at home. So what I see often wrong with lunges is people going way too long in their step, in their lunge. A big angle here, a nice long step, and then they're going to really push themselves back here. Even for a step back lunge, they'll step way back and they got this big angle, lots of distance between their feet, and then it's kind of hard to push themselves back. A lunge typically should be a short step. So I always tell my clients to do short lunging steps. So when you lunge, it should be nice and short. And a good way to check this for yourself is this back leg, this back knee, when you go down into your lunge, should almost be pointing straight to the floor. A little bit of an angle back is fine, but we want it to be nice and short, not long. We're not a long lunge here, that's a stretch. We want to be a short lunge. Okay, so this is our lunge position right here. From here, it's again the front leg that does the work. We push up off this front heel, and we bring ourselves back up. Okay, so again, a short step is ideal here. Short step, not a long step. We don't want a long step. Keep your lunges nice and short. You should feel your glutes, you should feel your hamstrings, and again, a little bit of your quads working. A couple of variations that you can do for the lunge. My favorite type of lunge, and one of the easier lunges in terms of the progressions, is a step back lunge. So that's where you stay in one position, you step back, short. We think about going straight down, straight back up, and then we can switch. Straight down, straight back up. Straight down, straight back up. That's a step back lunge. That's kind of like the first progression for the lunges. The reason why is because the front leg, like I said, is doing the work, or most of the work, for step back lunges. And in the step back, the front leg is stationary. It's not moving, staying right there. The front leg is staying right there. When we look at step forward lunges or walking lunges, my working leg, the one that steps forward, is now moving. It's not staying stable. It's moving as I try and go into my lunge, opposed to a step back where it's just staying nice and still. So because of that, for a step forward or a walking lunge, they're harder because now we have this controlled eccentric motion as we step forward, and we're not as stable on this front leg. It's not to say it's a bad progression, it's just not as easy to control as a step back lunge. So what I usually say is step back lunges first. Do your step back lunges, feel them working properly, a nice short step, then start going into a step forward lunge or a walking lunge or whatever it is, but start with the step back lunge and use the lunge to look at muscular imbalances between left and right. So that's really what makes the lunges so good, is we can look at, are we stronger on the right side, stronger on the left side? Everybody's gonna have muscular imbalances. That's just the nature of it. But we can recognize these muscular imbalances, and then we can use unilateral exercises like the lunge to help fix those muscular imbalances. So all you have to do to kind of assess this on your own is maybe do some step back lunges because they're easiest to control. Maybe do 10 on each side, alternating, and see which leg maybe feels stronger, which one feels different. Are we feeling the muscles engage differently on one side? Do we maybe not quite have that neural pathway the way we should on one side? Try and start recognizing these in your lunges to see which side is a little bit weaker. Then, to fix muscular imbalances, what you want to do is you want to work on that weak side by performing that side first. So if you're going to do step back lunges, and for example, my left side is weaker than my right side, I would do my left side step back lunges first. So say I'm going to do 10 of them, I would just do 10 step back lunges on my left side, knowing that's the weak side and really trying to focus on those cues. And then I would do 10 on the right side. Even if, whatever the number of reps you do, I'm just saying 10, whatever it is, even if you do those reps and it feels easy on the right side but hard on the left side, keep the reps the same, both left to right. We don't want to create more muscle imbalances, right? So do your left leg first if that's your weak side, then do your right side, but do the same amount of reps on both. If you want to make that even harder, do a bilateral exercise like a squat, and then go to step back lunges on the weak side first. That's a really great way to catch up weak or muscle imbalances, to make them a little bit stronger, is doing a bilateral exercise where both are working, and then do a unilateral on the weak side first. So again, to review, for the lunge, short step, push through the heel, I'll do a step back lunge, short step, push through the heel, straight up. We should feel the glute here, at the bottom. The glute, hamstring, quad should be engaged, push through the heel, straight up. Okay? Short step on those step back lunges. Try and feel your imbalances, and then use those unilateral exercises like the lunge to try and fix those. All right, guys. A lot of information in 30 minutes that we've been going here. Just to quickly review. We went over the hip hinge. We went over the deadlift, we went over the squat, we went over the lunge. A lot of it, especially the first three, comes from the hip hinge. I want you guys to practice the hip hinge using the broom or the dowel, whatever you have to maintain those 3 points of contact. Go back to the beginning of the video to review, and do your hip hinge, trying to feel the neutral spine maintained. Don't lose your neutral spine. You have to maintain a neutral spine. okay? Do your hip hinge, then you can start doing it into a deadlift, whether you have a barbell, whether it's with a kettlebell, whatever, anything you have at home is fine. And then so from there, hip hinge, deadlift, squat. Remember, a squat is a hip hinge to start. Hips go back, and then we just drop that into a squat a little bit more, maintaining those 3 points of contact on our feet. And then again, the lunges staying nice and short as we do those. Start with a step back lunge, then go to step forward lunging, try and recognize muscular imbalances from left to right, and then start to fix it. All right, guys, so much information there. I'm really glad you guys listened, made through. This was a lot of fun. I'm gonna keep making these videos. I think if I get good feedback from you guys and you guys have a topic that you want me to discuss, I'll absolutely keep doing these. Like I said before, I like to teach, I like to educate, I like to help. Right now it's a little bit hard, so this is my way of giving back. These are free 30-minute lessons that I'm going to give you guys. So if you have any requests of things to look at, let me know. If you want me to discuss something, let me know. In the future, things that I want to discuss is the posterior pelvic tilt, is the bracing of the core. I also want to show you guys some core exercises that you can be doing based off of the way that the core should be working. So those are things that we might do in the future, but I'd love to hear back from you guys. What do you guys want to hear? What do you guys want to learn? Let me help you, okay? Also, last thing, send me some videos. I want to see you guys practicing these. Practice your hip hinge, use the dowel, practice your short lunges. How do they feel? What's going wrong? Maybe what can I help you more with? I want to see your videos. Post them to Instagram, tag me, Kaylin Anglos, KFit Conditioning, whatever. Just tag me in them. Let's see you guys doing your lunges, your hip hinge, your deadlift, your squats. Let's keep moving through this quarantine, through this self-isolation. It's going to keep you healthy. It's going to keep you active. It's going to keep your mind positive, okay? Keep going, guys. Thanks again for listening in. I truly appreciate it, and we'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks, guys.